Now, without a shadow of a doubt, 2023 has been one of the most spectacular years in video game releases in recent history anyway, and to celebrate the end of this fabulous year, I'm not just going to do you a top 5 list of games released in 2023, I'm going to show you my top 5 backlog games that'll be in 2023 as well. So if you're interested in seeing the new games and probably some of the older games too, you just wait until after these. Now, as I said in the introduction, 2023 has been a spectacular year when it comes to video game releases. Of course, you must play your backlog as well. If you don't play your backlog, it's just going to grow and grow and grow, and next year's frontlog games, they'll just add to your backlog and you'll never get anywhere. So I set myself a task to play as many of my backlog games that I could, as well as playing the new games. So these two top 5 lists are 1 backlog games and 2 new games released this year. Now, please bear in mind that these games are ranked on my personal feelings on the games, and of course games that I played during the year. If I missed out any games, especially from the new games released, that you think should be in my top 5 that aren't here, well, maybe I didn't play them, or maybe I didn't enjoy them quite as much as you did, and that's perfectly okay, because if we didn't have different tastes in video games, the world would be a much more boring place. But without further ado, let's get cracking with these 2 top 5 lists, starting with a backlog game. And number 5 on the backlog games of 2023 that I chalked off, we have Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. And of course, being a massive Star Wars geek, this is a game that I should have played much sooner. But also, you have to bear in mind, I'm also a Sony pony, which meant that I didn't play many of the Greenspine games back in the day. And I'm glad I'm getting round to playing them now, because I'm getting to play games like Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic for the first time, and that's why it's number 5 on my backlog games beaten in 2023. But let's move on now to a game that was released in 2023, and the first game that I'm going to show you, number 5, Assassin's Creed Mirage. Now, I know a lot of people are tired with the Assassin's Creed games. Well, I'm not one of them, and the beauty of Assassin's Creed Mirage is it's went back old school. Not proper old school, but it's much more like the original Assassin's Creed games, but built in that new sexy engine that we have for the games such as Origins, Odyssey and Valhalla. So I'm quite happy to have Assassin's Creed Mirage as my number 5 game of 2023 of the new releases. Now let's move on to the next backlog game, and the next backlog game coming in at number 4 is Live Alive. Now, beside the fact that I am an RPG guy, Live Alive was a game that obviously passed me by back in the day. One reason, of course, was that it wasn't released over here in PAL territories, and 2, of course, it's only just recently I've managed to make friends with the Switch, and I've started looking at the Switch library, especially when it comes to RPGs. So when Live Alive was recommended by Sega Head, I had no option but to pick it up, put it in and give it a play. And let me tell you, if you haven't played this gem of a game, then I encourage you to get out there and give it a go, because I also think this is a type of RPG that can get a non-RPG player into playing RPGs. It's a stunningly beautiful game, and not only that, the experience is very dip in and play for a bit, and it doesn't take up too much of your time. But for me, Live Alive was the number 4 backlog game that I took off this year. So let's move on to the next game, which will be a new game and my number 4 game of 2023. I don't have a physical copy because it's not been released in physical form yet. It will be happening quite soon, and if you haven't guessed already, that game is the wonderful Sea of Stars. Now, quite fortunately, most people got the opportunity to play this game day one through either Game Pass or even PlayStation Premium, which is where I obviously played it. Now, let me tell you, for a new game in the old 16-bit RPG style, you couldn't ask for anything more. I'm not going to talk too much in depth about the game, well, 1, because it's a JRPG, which means story's important to it, and I don't want to give away the story, and 2, this is not where I'm going to review these games. I'm simply going to let you know where they are on my list when it comes to games that I played in 2023. So of course, Sea of Stars doesn't have a place here at the moment. It will as soon as I get the opportunity. But let's move on to game number 3, my 3rd favourite backlog game of 2023. And this has been a long time in coming too, and it's Chrono Trigger. Now of course I know Chrono Trigger is a classic, I know that everybody absolutely raves about it, and it's definitely considered to be one of the best video games ever made. The reason that it took until 2023 for me to get round to it is basically because of availability. Over here in Scotland I didn't have access to the SNES game when it released, so we had to wait until this came out on the DS, and of course back in the day if I was going to play a handheld it certainly wouldn't be a DS, it wouldn't be a Nintendo handheld, it'd be a Sony handheld. But here we are in 2023, Chrono Trigger is finally off the backlog and it's my number 3 backlog game of 2023. So let's move on to my number 3 new release of 2023, and that is Octopath Traveler 2. Now, believe it or not, I also played the first Octopath Traveler this year for the first time as well, and after absolutely falling in love with that experience and Octopath Traveler 2 just coming out just after I'd beat the first one, I was left with no option but to pick up Octopath Traveler 2 and see if they managed to improve on the near perfection of the first game. Now I know a lot of people out there thought the first game was a little bit on the grindy side, but hey, I'm a JRPG guy and grinding is pretty much my home turf. They did however manage to address a few of the issues some people had with the first game, and quite remarkably managed to make Octopath Traveler 2 even better than the first game, which is something that I don't always see when it comes to video games. So for me it's a very worthy number 3 game of 2023's releases, so let's move on to the backlog number 2. And the number 2 backlog game that I played this year in 2023 is Bravely Default 2. Now this game is probably one of the most important games that I've played this year, and I'm not overstating that in the slightest. And the reason that I say that is quite simply this: after playing what I thought was a travesty of Final Fantasy 16, one of the channel's viewers reached out and said if you want to get the bad taste of Final Fantasy 16 out of your mouth and you haven't played Bravely Default 2, that will be the ideal medicine for you. And let me tell you, he absolutely wasn't lying, and I'm quite happy to have Bravely Default 2 as my number 2 backlog game of the year for 2023, which leads us on to our number 2 game of released in 2023, and this game is RoboCop Rogue City. Now I'm not sure how many of you out there have already played RoboCop Rogue City, and if you haven't then I must encourage you to go out there and get yourself a copy. And the best way that I can sell this game to you without getting into too much detail is quite simply this: you take a pinch of Fallout 3, a dash of LA Noire, and wrap it up in an ultra-violent 80s movie theme, and voila, one of the best games that I played this year. Now yes, it's not the state of the art and bang bangs when it comes to video games, it's not got the best graphics, it's not got the greatest sound, it's not even the longest game that you're going to play, but it's one of the most truest games that you'll ever play, and that's something that I love about video games. I love video games where if you play it you feel like you're part of that world, and with this game you truly feel like you're part of that wonderful 80s RoboCop world. I grew up in that time, absolutely loved it back then, and here it is now as my number 2 game for 2023, and yeah, go and get it. Definitely this one, it's a must buy. I mean, most of them are, but this one certainly is. So let's move on now away from the new games and on to my number 1 backlog game of 2023. Now this one might take a few people by surprise because I have favourite games from the past, and this is linked to those favourite games of the past, but it's one I'd never played before, not until this year. And I've got 2 examples here for you because it's Persona 4 and Persona 4 Golden. As many of you out there will already know, Persona 5 is one of my favourite games of all time, despite how recent that game is. Kinda technically recent anyway. But Persona 5 was my introduction to this particular series of games, as it was for many people, so I was fairly confident that I was going to enjoy Persona 4. Now, I'll be frankly honest, I didn't know how much I was going to enjoy it, because obviously Persona 5 is pretty much the pinnacle of that series at the moment. But let me tell you, if you've played Persona 5 and you haven't played 4 yet, then without a doubt, get yourself out there, find yourself a copy. You can even get it digitally on the PlayStation Store, play it on your PS4 or PS5. It's a doddle to get a hold of just now, and it's even become one of my favourite games of all time, despite the fact I've only played it for the first time this year. Well, I've played it 3 times this year. That hopefully speaks volumes about Persona 4 and Persona 4 Golden. But that is the last of the backlog games, and we're moving on to the big one, Game of the Year. Well, new release Game of the Year, because Persona 4 Golden certainly deserves the title of Game of the Year. But for new releases, my Game of the Year, the GOAT, is probably going to surprise a few people, it might not, but for me it was Hogwarts Legacy. Now, I don't know if anyone out there watching this thinks that I'm making some sort of a joke. I'm absolutely not. Hogwarts Legacy was one of the first games that I played this year. It was certainly the first new release that I played this year, and right from the very first moments of this game, it never failed to deliver. And part of the reason that it pulled me in so much, it was quite simply, like RoboCop and like even Spider-Man back in 2018, Hogwarts Legacy actually manages to transport you, or at least it did for me, into that whole Hogwarts universe. I also like the fact that the game is set in the past, it's nowhere near the Harry Potter era, so when you're playing through the game with your own character, and it is very much an RPG, you do more feel like it's you that's playing as the character, and that's what drags me into an RPG. And like I said about Spider-Man in 2018, that was the first time I felt like I was actually playing as Spider-Man, and even this year with RoboCop, you feel like you're playing as RoboCop. Hogwarts Legacy is just an absolute masterpiece. If you haven't played it, I can't recommend it enough, but there you go, my friends. This is my top 10 games of 2023. We have 5 backlog games, we have 5 new releases, and what did you think of my list? Is this anywhere close to where you would be? I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are screaming that Resident Evil 4 Remake isn't on the list, that Final Fantasy 16, for such a huge Final Fantasy fan, isn't on the list. But these were the games that truly got me through 2023. The new ones, absolutely fantastic, every one of these, including Sea of Stars, which isn't here yet. I will get the physical copy as soon as it comes out. And of course, it's an interesting selection of backlog games because we only see one PlayStation 2 game up there, which is a bit unusual. Drop down into the comments if you have anything that you wish that I had on my list that I didn't. Let me know what your top 5 new games were. Tell me about the backlog games that you've played, because interaction between you and me, well, that's what makes YouTube special. Thank you all for watching as always, and until next time, cheerio.